In the year 2000, Russia was rising from the ashes of the Soviet Union. The newly appointed president, Vladimir Putin, needed a decisive display to assert his revitalized power to the world. The biggest naval exercise in a decade. And the K-141 Kursk was the star of the show. A nuclear steel giant, built to withstand the worst the West could offer. More than just a war machine, this submarine was the very symbol of national pride emerging from years of decline. The objective was clear: to prove that the Russian military was, once again, a global force. But deep beneath the Barents Sea, a simple defect in a practice torpedo shattered that entire performance. A flaw in a weld, a leak of unstable chemical fuel, and one small human error, a hatch that was left open. In less than 3 minutes, 2 massive explosions occurred. The Kursk was destroyed, not by an enemy but by its own torpedo, turning a symbol of power into an iron coffin 108 meters down. The tragedy extended beyond the waves. On the surface, a new drama unfolded. The show of concealment. 23 sailors had miraculously survived the initial blast, yet Russian authorities' deliberate secrecy and rejection of international aid extinguished their final hopes of rescue. This isn't just the story of the Kursk's sinking. It's the story of how secrecy and pride turned a rescue into a tragedy. K-141, the Kursk. It wasn't just a submarine. It was a steel behemoth, a nuclear monster, 154 meters long and weighing 18,000 tons. It easily rivaled a large battle cruiser. Nicknamed the aircraft carrier killer, this Oscar II-class submarine was the pride and symbol of Russia's revitalized Northern Fleet power. The pinnacle of Soviet engineering, its sole purpose was to threaten NATO's surface fleets. But the danger lay within its heart, in the torpedo compartment. The Kursk carried massive Type 65 torpedoes, weapons so powerful they could take out an entire carrier group. To reach their incredible speed and range, they used a volatile oxidizer called high-test peroxide, or HTP, a chemical once favored during the Cold War for its efficiency, but feared for its instability. When exposed to heat or metal like brass or copper, HTP rapidly breaks down, releasing oxygen and heat in a violent chain reaction. Just a small leak could turn into an explosion, expanding thousands of times its volume in a fraction of a second. A dangerous design flaw, born from an older era of engineering risk. In August 2000, the Kursk was engaged in the massive Summer X exercise, the first and largest naval drill Russia had held since the collapse of the Soviet Union. This exercise was not just a military maneuver. It was a political and geopolitical spectacle. Led by its newly elected president, Vladimir Putin, Russia was eager to reassert its military might to NATO and the Western world after years of post-Soviet decline. It was a mandatory show of national power. In this demonstration, the Kursk was the spearhead. Its 118-man crew, composed of the fleet's best sailors and commanders, were ready for their key mission. Launching a dummy HTP torpedo at a designated target. 11:28 a.m., Saturday, August 12, 2000. The Kursk was ready to fire, and the world was watching. Deep beneath the Barents Sea, sailors loaded the final dummy HTP torpedo into tube number 4 in compartment 1. Protocols were outdated, and training was minimal. A sailor noticed the hydrogen peroxide fuel leaking from a faulty weld on the torpedo's body. Amidst the rush and the insistence on strict timing, the grave warning was ignored. Here, another fatal mistake occurred. While the best practice during a leak was to seal all watertight hatches, the crew left the ventilation duct hatch between compartments 1 and 2 open. A small, simple error meant to reduce the shockwave pressure from a successful firing. But on this day, that decision signed the death warrant of dozens. The volatile HTP fuel reacted to even the slightest heat, or to the metals inside the torpedo tube. Within seconds, the leaking fuel ignited a chemical chain reaction, releasing intense heat and pressure. What started as a few drops of peroxide became a blazing reaction, unstoppable once it began. 11:29 and 34 seconds. The first explosion. Not a military strike, but a monstrous chemical reaction. Torpedo number 4, with its 1,000 kilograms of concentrated HTP, detonated. Fire engulfed the torpedo compartment, and the resulting shockwave instantly killed all 7 sailors in compartment 1. But the disaster had just begun. The pressure wave, smoke, and fire rushed with incredible speed through the open ventilation duct into compartments 2, 3, and 4. All 36 control room personnel, including the submarine's commander, Captain Liachin, were killed or severely injured instantly. There was no chance to send a distress signal. Just 2 minutes and 14 seconds later, at 11:31 and 48 seconds, the second explosion hit. The immense heat from the first blast triggered a chain reaction, detonating the warheads of 5 to 7 combat-ready torpedoes in compartment 1. Seismographs across northern Europe registered the event at 4.2 on the Richter scale, 250 times more powerful than the first explosion. The destructive force was equivalent to 3 tons of TNT. The Kursk, designed to withstand a direct enemy torpedo hit, was torn apart by its own arsenal. Steel plates buckled, and the double hull shattered. The blast sent a shockwave through the submarine, 50 times the force of gravity, a pressure so intense it could break bones and crush steel. Temperatures inside the compartment soared beyond 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire bow section of the Kursk was annihilated. The ocean rushed in at a terrifying speed through the ruptured hull. The pride of the fleet, with a colossal hole in its body, sank 108 meters to the Barents Sea floor. The submarine had been reduced to an iron coffin. Yet, in compartments 6 through 9, 23 men had survived. On the surface, in the thick of the Summer X exercise, everything seemed normal. No one expected a gigantic nuclear submarine to vanish without a trace. At the Northern Fleet headquarters, Kursk's silence was initially dismissed as a simple communication failure, a scenario commonplace in the decaying post-Soviet fleet. 1:30 p.m., the scheduled time for the Kursk to surface and report its mission success had passed. At HQ, no sound came from the pride of the Northern Fleet. Even during later check-in times for routine communication, Kursk's silence continued. Every minute of silence intensified the pressure on the naval command. This critical lack of a signal, which should have been the first alarm for a rescue operation, was rationalized by the simple assumption: the communication gear must be broken, an assumption that held the lives of 118 men hostage. The technical failure now metastasized into a political tragedy. Russian commanders, insistent on maintaining face globally and avoiding scandal during an exercise symbolizing renewed power, were reluctant to accept the truth. They preferred hours of denial to announcing that the pride of the fleet had sunk. They falsely claimed the cause was a collision with a NATO spy submarine. Meanwhile, the newly elected president, Vladimir Putin, was on his summer vacation in Sochi. This was the golden hours of rescue, a critical window of opportunity when the 23 remaining sailors might have been saved. But Moscow not only concealed the truth, it categorically refused offers of immediate aid from the UK, Norway, and the United States. Russia's rescue equipment was obsolete. Their main salvage vessel was a converted lumber carrier not equipped for the turbulent seas, and their actual deep submergence rescue vehicles were awaiting repair in port. Denial and delay led the men to their doom. National pride was prioritized over the lives of 118 human beings. This failure was not merely a military mistake. It was a monumental managerial blunder that stained the history of modern Russia. 108 meters down, within the heart of the iron behemoth, a different battle raged. The 23 surviving sailors in the aftmost compartment, compartment 9, were now prisoners in absolute darkness and bitter cold. They had passed through compartments 6, 7, and 8 to reach the last safe haven, a space with an escape hatch, but no path to freedom. These sailors were the fleet's finest. They had sealed the watertight doors, preventing the complete spread of the disaster. But now they faced new enemies: cold water, deadly carbon dioxide, and absolute darkness. 1:15 p.m. 2 hours after the explosion, Captain Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov, the group's surviving commander, wrote a note in the dark with a trembling hand. A document that would become one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence from the disaster. It is 1:15 p.m. All personnel from sections 6, 7, and 8 have moved to section 9. There are 23 people here. We feel bad. We are weakened by carbon dioxide. The pressure is increasing in the compartment. If we head for the surface, we will not survive the compression. None of us can escape. It is hard to write in here, but I will try by feel. It seems like we have little chance, maybe 10 or 20%. I hope someone reads this someday. Do not despair. Kolesnikov. These heroic men knew they had to conserve oxygen. They relied on potassium superoxide cartridges, chemical systems designed to absorb CO2 and release oxygen for breathing. But science betrayed the Kursk a second time. In the final hours of their struggle for life, within the cramped, oil-fouled space, a simple accident occurred. A sailor dropped a spent superoxide cartridge into the polluted water below. Potassium superoxide, in contact with water and oil, triggered a sudden explosive chemical reaction and fire. This small fire consumed the last drops of oxygen in the compartment. The sailors who had survived the colossal blast either died from chemical burns and injuries, or slowly suffocated in the lethal concentration of carbon dioxide. The survivors had lasted only 6 hours after the second explosion. Meanwhile, on the surface, Russian authorities were still in denial and actively rejecting foreign aid. During those critical hours, while Russian officials were peddling the fabricated story of a NATO submarine collision, the outside world held its breath. International pressure and the mounting fury of the sailors' families, who could no longer tolerate the official lies, finally broke the Kremlin's wall of pride. 5 days after the sinking, on August 17th, Vladimir Putin finally and reluctantly accepted offers of foreign aid. Norwegian rescue ships, including the Normand Pioneer and the British rescue submarine LR-5, immediately arrived on the scene. They brought equipment vastly superior to Russia's own obsolete and non-functional devices. But here, national pride created yet another obstacle. Russian officials limited foreign divers' access. They feared foreigners would use the opportunity to spy and collect intelligence on Kursk's military technology. Finally, after intense negotiation, a compromise was reached. Norwegian divers were permitted to work on the aft compartment, compartment 9, but only to open the escape route. On August 21st, 9 days after the catastrophe, Norwegian divers successfully breached the escape hatch using advanced cutting techniques. The rescue compartment was empty of life. The bitter truth was revealed with the lowered cameras. Russian divers, entering after the Norwegians, found the bodies of the 23 sailors. They had perished in the absolute darkness and freezing cold. In the pocket of Officer Dmitry Kolesnikov, the devastating note was found, a document confirming they had been alive for those crucial hours after the initial blast. The rescue mission immediately morphed into a recovery operation. A year later, the gigantic Kursk was raised from the seabed at immense cost by the Dutch companies Mammoet and Smit International. Footage of the ruptured bow left no room for denial. This was not a collision. It was a catastrophic internal explosion that annihilated the Kursk. The recovery of the Kursk and the subsequent investigations debunked all the conspiracy theories. No American submarine was involved. No World War II mine. The killer was a combination of human error, flawed fuel, and obsolete equipment. But the Kursk tragedy was not just a technical failure. It was a managerial disgrace that exposed all the deep-seated failings of the post-Soviet state. The anger of the public, particularly the sailors' families, reached a boiling point during public meetings. In one such heated confrontation with Vladimir Putin, when an angry mother named Nadezhda Tilik screamed and accused the government of lying, officials had her forcibly sedated. An act that the public viewed as a disturbing symbol of the Soviet-era traditions of repression and secrecy. The tragedy clearly proved that in Russia, national pride took precedence over human life. The final government report cited flagrant disciplinary breaches, shoddy and poorly maintained equipment, and negligence, incompetence, and mismanagement. Yet, in the end, no one was prosecuted. None of the senior naval officers responsible for the delays in rescue or the cover-up served jail time. Only a few officials were disciplined or transferred, while the Kursk's commander and crew were posthumously declared heroes. And this is the legacy of the Kursk. The Kursk is remembered, not for its technology, but for the critical hours when the hope of life was swallowed by pride, secrecy, and bureaucracy. This submarine became the enduring symbol of a catastrophic blunder, where 118 brave men paid the ultimate price for a political exercise.